Hey guys, this is Subhash Mishra, your test coach. Today we will learn about test automation framework. So we'll mainly try to understand what is test automation framework, benefits of test automation framework, and different types of test automation framework. So the very first thing is what is test automation framework, right? So a test automation framework is a set of guidelines used for creating and designing test cases. So, what are these guidelines? These guidelines can be coding standard, test data handling methods, object repositories, process for storing test results, or information on how to access external resources. I think these are sounding bit complicated, right? Let me explain you with one real-time example. So, most of you have an experience in attending any telephonic or video conference interview, right? So when HR send you an interview invite email, in that email they used to put some guidelines for the interview. So what are those guidelines usually they send? Like keep a laptop or PC with a webcam for the interview. Make sure you have a good internet. Try to be in calm place to avoid unnecessary noise. Join the interview conference before 5 minutes just to ensure you don't face any technical difficulty to join the call. Prepare well about Java and Selenium concept. Here I am assuming you are giving an interview for Java and Selenium. So these are the some guidelines maybe HR have given you in the email. So what do you think? You can attend that interview without observing these guidelines or not? I think you can, right? You can attend that interview without those guidelines. In case your internet doesn't work or laptop has some problem, maybe they can call you in your mobile and take the interview, right? Then why you will follow the guidelines? So if you follow the guidelines, definitely it will be a very good experience for both interviewer and interviewee. The interview process will be smooth, clean and fast. So now you understand when we follow some guidelines, we get better results, but these guidelines are not mandatory to achieve our goal, right? So similarly, a test automation framework can be defined as a set of guidelines which when followed produce beneficial results. So a test automation framework is a set of guidelines or rules used for creating and designing test cases. A framework is comprised of a combination of practices and tools that are designed to help QA professionals test more efficiency. These guidelines could include coding standards, test data handling methods, object repositories, process for storing test results, or information how to access external resources. As I told, these are not mandatory rules and testers can still script a record test without following them. But if you use an organized framework, you'll get an additional benefits. So let's see what are the benefits of test automation framework. Here you can see few benefits. Okay, so the very first thing is reusability of code. So test automation framework allow testers to reuse test codes for multiple scenarios. For example, you wrote a piece of code for login to an application, right? So same code you can use in different test cases. Also, same code you can use while testing in different environments, right? So usually it happens, right? We write login code once and we use it in multiple places because login is the very first test cases you need for all scenarios. So you don't need to write it every time, right? So you just write one login method and use it wherever you need it, right? So reusability of the code is one of the benefits of test automation framework. So the next thing is improved efficiency and maximum coverage. So test automation frameworks increase productivity due to standardization. It guarantees maximum test coverage as the set of codes in a framework are executed in a standard manner from the beginning. Okay, then low cost maintenance. Test cases can be developed at a fairly low cost because the framework already have established rules. Also, given these codes can be reused multiple times. So the cost and time of building test cases for new features are low. So it will always be maintenance is low, right? If you are using test automation framework. Okay, then next thing is minimal manual intervention. So the automation framework run according to the guidelines defined by the automation tester. Since maximum coverage is already inbuilt and achieved at the initial stage, there is very little or no intervention required by individuals to run the automation test. Okay, so in case the process fails, the automation framework can be run again with a little change, but the data remains constant and devoid of additional effort from an individual or team. Then easy reporting will have all the automation test cases results in one report, showing how many test cases passed, how many test cases failed, or how many test cases skipped. If test case is failed, why failed? With proper screenshot and proper logs. So we can easily analyze the issue, right? So by looking at the report, anyone can easily understand the status of the testing. So if you are using a test automation framework, the reporting will be very easy, right? Next we'll move what are the different types of test automation framework. So there are 6 common types of test automation framework. Each automation framework has its own architecture, advantage and disadvantage. So it's important to choose the right framework when preparing your test plan. Okay, so you should always choose which framework will fit your requirement, will give you the best advantage. Okay, so different frameworks like here you can see linear automation framework, modular driven framework, library architecture testing framework, data driven framework, keyword driven framework and hybrid driven testing framework. Okay, so first we will try to understand what is linear automation framework, right? So linear automation framework is also known as record and playback framework. It is used to test small sized applications. The linear automation framework is a basic level test automation framework and commonly used in testing of small applications. So this framework is also called as record and playback framework. In this type of framework, the creation and execution of test scripts are done individually for each test case. Testers record each test step such as browsing, navigation, user inputs or checkpoints and then place the script to execute the test. Okay, so what are the advantage of linear automation framework? So there is no need to write custom code. So expertise in test automation is not necessary. So you can say coding skill is not required much. Okay, this is one of the fastest way to generate test scripts since they can be easily recorded in a minimal amount of time. So you can save lot of time and it's quick enough. Okay, the test workflow is easier to understand for anyone involved in testing since the scripts are laid out in a sequential manner like manual testing. So it is easy to understand and easy to use. Okay, so what are the disadvantages here? The scripts developed using this framework are not reusable. So we are talking right the benefits of test automation framework. So if you are using a test automation framework, your scripts should be reusable. But if you are using linear automation framework, your scripts are not reusable. Okay, the data is hard coded into the test script, so the test cases cannot be rerun with multiple sets and will need to be modified if the data is altered. Okay, then maintenance is high because any changes to the application will require a lot of rework. So this model is not particularly scalable as the scope of testing expands. Okay, so maintenance is very high here. This is one of the major disadvantage of linear automation framework. Okay, so let's move to the next. Then we have modular driven framework. Okay, in this type of testing framework, tester needs to create test scripts module wise by breaking down the complete application under test into smaller part and create test scripts individually. So to implement this framework, testers divide the application under test into separate units, functions or sections, each of which will be tested in isolation. Okay. So after breaking down the application into individual modules, a test script is created for each part and then combined to build larger tests in a hierarchical fashion. Okay, these larger sets of tests will represent various test cases. So the main reason for using the modular framework is to build an abstraction layer. So any changes made in individual test will not affect the master module. Okay, so what are the advantages of modular framework? If any changes are made to the application, only the module and its associate individual test script needs to be fixed. So you don't have to modify the rest of the application and can leave it as it was. Okay, creating test cases takes less effort because test scripts from different modules can be reused. So these are the major advantage of modular framework. And what are the disadvantages? Data is still hard coded into the test script since the tests are executed separately. So you cannot use multiple data sets. Okay, programming knowledge is required to set up the framework. So you should be good in coding skill. Okay, then we'll move to the next framework. We have the next thing is library architecture testing framework. Okay, so the library architecture framework is based on the modular framework but having some additional benefits. Okay, so in modular testing framework we divide the application under test into modules, whereas in library architecture framework we identify the common tasks that need to be run and group them into functions. Once the functions are grouped, then these groups will be kept in a library. The test scripts reuse these libraries to create new test cases. So what are the advantages of library architecture testing framework? Similar to the modular framework, utilizing this architecture will lead to a high level of modularization, which makes test maintenance and scalability easier and more cost effective. And the next thing is common library functions can be used by multiple test scripts. So this framework has a higher degree of reusability. Okay, so these are the major advantages. What is the disadvantage? Test data is still hard coded into the script. So any changes to the data will require changes to the scripts. Then you need technical expertise, okay, to write and analyze the common functions within the test scripts. Okay, so you need good amount of coding skill. Okay, and test scripts take more time to develop. Okay, so it is time consuming also. So these are the disadvantages. So let's move to the next one. We have the data driven framework. Okay, so the data driven framework separates the test data from test script logic. So in data driven framework we keep test data separately in external files or resources such as Excel sheet, text file, CSV file or database. Okay, so the test scripts are connected to the external data source and told to read and populate the necessary data when needed. So this framework allows us to create test automation scripts by passing different sets of test data. We can easily make the test scripts work properly for different sets of test data. For example, if you need to test login functionality of an application, you should test it with different valid and invalid users. So if you will keep the test data like different users in an Excel sheet, your login script can read data from that Excel sheet and will get executed multiple times for all test data. So test script will be reusable and will provide more coverage. So this framework significantly reduces the number of test scripts compared to the module based framework. So if you'll see what are the advantages, it supports multiple data sets, right? So test can be executed with multiple data sets. Multiple scenarios can be tested quickly by varying the data, thereby reducing the number of scripts needed. Okay, hard coding data can be avoided, so any changes to the test scripts do not affect the data being used, and vice versa. You will save time by executing more tests faster. Okay, so what are the disadvantages here? So main thing is we need coding skills. So we need highly experienced tester who is proficient in various programming languages to properly utilize this framework design, and they will need to identify and format the external data sources and to write code or create functions which can connect the test to those external data source seamlessly. Setting of a data driven framework takes a significant amount of time. So these are the major disadvantages. Okay, we'll move to the next one. Next one is keyword driven framework. So a keyword driven framework means a framework which is driven by a keyword. So what is keyword? Keyword is an action that can be performed on a GUI component. For example, in a UI, you are seeing a text box. Some keywords or actions for this text box would be input text, verify value, verify property, and so on. So the keyword driven testing framework is also known as table driven testing. Okay, in keyword driven testing, we use a table format to define keywords for each function or method that we would execute. So in the table, keywords are stored in a step-by-step fashion with an associated object or the part of the UI that the action is being performed on. So for this approach to work properly, a shared object repository is needed to map the objects to their associated actions. Okay, so what are the advantages of keyword driven framework? Minimal scripting knowledge is required. Okay, a single keyword can be used across multiple test scripts, so the code is reusable. Okay, then test scripts can be built independent of the application on the test. Okay, then what are the disadvantages? The initial cost of setting up the framework is high. It is a time consuming and complex process. The keywords needs to be defined and the object repositories or libraries need to be set up. Okay, you need an employee with good test automation skills. Okay, then keywords can be a hassle to maintain when scaling a test operation. You will need to continue building out the repositories and keyword tables. So these are the major disadvantages. Okay, then we'll move to the next one is hybrid driven testing framework. So this is the most used framework in the market. Okay, as the name suggests, this framework is the combination of one or more frameworks, whatever we discussed as of now. It attempts to leverage the strength and benefits of other frameworks and mitigate their weakness. So every application we test is different. So the process used to test them will be also different. Nowadays, most of the teams using agile model. So setting up a flexible framework for automated testing is very important. So a hybrid framework can be more easily adapted to get the best test results. So what are the advantages? This type leverage the advantage of all kind of related frameworks. Okay, and what is the disadvantage? Tests are fully scripted in a hybrid testing framework, so it increases the automation effort. Okay, and you also need employees with good test automation skills. Okay, so these are the disadvantages. So that's all about the different automation framework. So all of this test automation framework can be effectively used to handle the code in a systematic way, which can be reviewed by a third person easily. Okay, you can choose the framework as per your project requirement, team expertise, and time. With one more important thing is budget. Okay, So test automation framework boosts productivity with standardization. By adopting the framework, you can ensure the maximum test coverage in your development process. So choose your test automation framework wisely. Thank you. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comment section. I'll try to explain it. Please like, share and subscribe to my channel.